Have you ever needed someone so desperately, not for anything extravagant, just to survive, and the one person who should have shown up without question chose something else entirely? What if that something else was a luxury car with a giant bow on it, posted to Instagram the same night she told you she was broke? My name is Zara, and I need you to stay with me for this one, because what I'm about to share will shake something deep inside you. Let's go. I was sitting in a hospital parking lot at 6:43 in the evening, still in the clothes I had worn to my pre-op appointment, trying to hold my phone steady enough to dial. The engine was off. The windows were fogging up slowly from the outside. I had been sitting there for 11 minutes telling myself I could do this without calling anyone. And then I had run out of time and options and called my mother anyway. I told her everything calmly. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. My insurance had confirmed coverage for the procedure itself, but not for the full hospital deposit required before admission. I was short by an amount that felt enormous to me and would not have registered as significant in a life with slightly more breathing room. I told her I would pay her back within 2 months. I told her I was not asking for a gift. She sighed the way she always sighed when I needed something, long, slow, weighted with performance. She said she was completely broke, barely surviving. She said she wished she could help, but her own bills were crushing her. She said she was sorry. I apologized for asking. I told her it was fine. I hung up and sat in the parking lot, and stared at the steering wheel, and focused on not crying until I got home. That night I picked up my phone to distract myself and opened Instagram. My mother was smiling beside a brand new luxury SUV with a giant silver bow on the hood. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I sat up straighter and brought the screen closer, and read the caption twice. Hard work pays off. Blessed beyond measure. 2 hearts. The comments were already full. Friends, cousins, church members, neighbors, all flooding in with congratulations and heart emojis and variations of "you deserve this." She had responded to several of them already with little grateful replies. I called her immediately. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same result. Then a text came through. Can't talk right now, I'm out. I scrolled back through the photos with the specific numb focus of someone trying to establish facts before allowing themselves to feel anything. There were 6 pictures. The car at the dealership. The car in our family driveway. The bow up close. And then one that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for. My younger sibling, Petra, was in the passenger seat. Laughing. Head tilted back, completely relaxed, like this was just a normal Tuesday evening. I stared at that photo for a long time. This hadn't happened today. The dealership photos had different lighting, afternoon not evening. They had been there for hours. While I was at pre-op appointments. While I was doing the math on my hospital deposit. While I was convincing myself not to call anyone. This had been planned. I called my mother the next morning. She answered this time. And her voice had that particular flat quality it always got when she knew a conversation was coming that she didn't want to have. I asked her about the car. I kept my voice level. I asked her how she had purchased a luxury SUV on the same evening. She told me she had nothing to offer toward my surgery deposit. She said the car was none of my business. I reminded her, gently, specifically, that she had used the exact words "completely broke" and "barely surviving" fewer than 12 hours before that post went live. She said I was making everything about myself. She said she was allowed to have things without it becoming a referendum on my needs. She said I was always doing this. A phrase she deployed whenever I noticed something real, and she needed it to stop existing. Then she said, "You're too old to keep expecting people to save you." I held the phone away from my face for a moment and breathed. Then she said, and this is the one I still hear sometimes when everything goes quiet, "Maybe if you managed your life better, you wouldn't keep ending up in these positions." I had nothing left to say to that. 3 minutes after I hung up, my phone buzzed. A text from Petra. "Mom's really upset. You should probably apologize." Petra called that afternoon. She had always been the designated smoother in our family. The one deployed after difficult conversations to reassure everyone that the difficult person was simply overreacting. That difficult person had always been me. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. She said the car was a necessary upgrade, and that our mother deserved nice things after everything she had been through. She said it with the particular confidence of someone who has never had to go without anything long enough to understand what without actually feels like. I listened to her talk for a few minutes, and while she talked, something old and buried started moving in my chest. Years of watching Petra's tuition get paid without discussion. Years of watching her rent get covered during rough patches. Years of watching emergency money appear for her needs while I was handed a version of, we all have to figure it out sometimes. I remembered last year. Our mother had called me in tears saying she was behind on her electricity and her phone, and she didn't know what to do. I had transferred money from my own account. Money I had set aside carefully, because she was my mother and she was scared, and what else do you do? After we hung up, I pulled up my bank records. I sat there and I added up every transfer, every temporary loan, every urgent family emergency that somehow always came to me. The total was more than double what I needed for surgery. I spent 2 hours going through old statements, transfer by transfer, year by year, building a picture I had never allowed myself to see in full before, because seeing it fully would have required feeling it fully. Utility bills I had covered when she said she was behind. Grocery runs I had paid for during visits. Money sent for medicine she said she couldn't afford. A larger transfer 18 months ago for what she described as a rental crisis. Smaller amounts scattered throughout that I had each justified individually at the time as small, as temporary, as what family does. Together they told a different story. I had been a financial resource for my mother for years while being told simultaneously that she had nothing to give. While I had been quietly contributing to her stability, she had apparently been quietly building towards something else, something with a leather interior and a giant silver bow. I sat with that for a long time. Then my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Adiz. We weren't particularly close, but she had always been kind in a quiet, observational way. Hey, I probably shouldn't say this, but you need to know what your mom has been telling people. Adiz told me carefully and with obvious discomfort. My mother had been talking to family members about my surgery. Specifically, she had been telling people it was optional, elective, not particularly serious, possibly exaggerated. She had also told people, multiple people apparently, that I had a pattern of manufacturing emergencies to extract money from the family, that I was dramatic, that she was exhausted from years of being drained by my needs. I read Adiz's messages slowly. Then I asked if she had anything in writing. She sent screenshots. Most of them were what I expected. My mother presenting herself as the burdened, loving, long-suffering parent. But then there was one message that stopped me completely. Sent to a family group I wasn't in, around the same time I had been on the phone with her in the hospital parking lot. The message read, "I'm done financing their bad decisions." I stared at that sentence. She had typed those words and sent them to family members on the same evening. She told me she was barely surviving and wished she could help. The performance of helplessness and the private declaration of refusal had existed at the same time, in the same phone, held by the same hands. She had chosen this, deliberately and consciously. And then she had gone to buy a car. The pain got worse that week. Not just emotionally, physically. My body was not interested in waiting for the deposit situation to resolve itself. And my doctor had been clear that further delay would complicate both the procedure and the recovery. My friend Odessa drove me to pre-op testing on Thursday, because I wasn't safe to drive myself. She sat in the waiting room for 3 hours without complaining, brought me crackers and water, and didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer. In the testing room, the doctor reviewed my results and told me directly that we could not keep pushing the date. He used words that cut through the noise of everything else happening, and reminded me that this was my body, my health, my one life, and that none of the family drama currently occupying my head was worth trading for it. I cried in the hospital bathroom afterward. Not gracefully. The kind of crying that surprises you with how much it holds. I cried because I was scared about the surgery, and I cried because I was angry about the money, and mostly I cried because the person who should have been sitting in that waiting room instead of Odessa was somewhere else entirely, toasting new beginnings in a restaurant, probably wearing something nice. That night, my mother posted again from what looked like a rooftop restaurant. Champagne. Candles. Caption. New season, new blessings. I put my phone face down and didn't pick it up again until morning. Odessa didn't ask for permission. She just started making calls. She set up a small fundraiser through a mutual network of friends and former colleagues, framing it simply: a medical expense gap, a friend who needed support, a goal with a clear deadline. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't name anyone or explain the full situation publicly. She just described a real need plainly and asked if anyone could help. I hated it. I hated the exposure of it. The feeling of my need becoming visible to people outside the immediate situation. I had spent so much of my life managing my own difficulties quietly and privately that asking felt like a physical discomfort I had to breathe through. But I had no other option. So I breathed through it. What happened next genuinely surprised me. People responded. Not just close friends, acquaintances, former co-workers, people I had known briefly in different seasons of my life. Messages came alongside donations. Many of them shared their own experiences. Parents who had failed them. Families who had chosen image over love. Moments of being medically vulnerable and completely alone. I read every message. Some of them I had to put down and come back to. Then one donation came through with no name attached. The amount was significant. The note read 4 words. You deserve the truth. The anonymous donor reached out the following day through a private message. Her name was Aunt Claudette, not my actual aunt, but a woman who had been close to our family for decades and had watched things from a perspective I had never thought to ask about. She asked if we could meet in person. I said yes. We sat in a quiet corner of a cafe near her neighborhood, and she spoke carefully, like someone who had been waiting for the right moment for a long time, and was making sure to use it correctly. She told me my mother had always described me to extended family and mutual friends as the difficult child. The one who never appreciated what she was given. The one who pushed back. The one who made everything harder than it needed to be. That framing, she said, had been consistent and deliberate. It explained why my mother was always positioned as patient and generous, and I was always positioned as ungrateful. Then Aunt Claudette opened her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Inside were printed messages, receipts, screenshots from conversations my mother had shared with her during what she thought were moments of private venting. One message discussed the car purchase specifically. My mother had written that she had finally done something for herself after months of saving by cutting off dead weight. I recognized the timeline immediately. The months she referenced were the same months I had stopped sending money after one of our arguments. I knew exactly what the dead weight was. Aunt Claudette showed me one more thing before we parted. A receipt trail suggesting money had moved in a way that didn't match what I had been told. It pulled up a memory I had tucked away and stopped examining. About 8 months earlier, during a period when I was switching banks and had flagged a temporary issue with account access, my mother had offered to hold a portion of my emergency savings, a small but meaningful amount, in her account for a few weeks until things settled. It had seemed reasonable at the time. She was my mother. When I asked for it back 6 weeks later, she said she had already transferred it to me, and I must have missed it in the transition. I had accepted that explanation because doubting it fully would have meant accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. Now I was ready. I checked every record I had from that period. I cross-referenced dates, amounts, and transfer confirmations. The money she had claimed to return did not appear in any account I had ever owned. It had not been returned. It had been absorbed. Into her accounts, into her expenses, into the accumulating financial story she had been building while I was building a completely different and completely false picture of our relationship. I sat with that fact until I could hold it steadily. Then I started preparing for surgery. Surgery day arrived on a gray Thursday morning. Odessa drove me again. She made me a playlist for the car ride and didn't talk much, which was exactly right. At the hospital, during the intake process, I kept glancing toward the entrance. I am not proud of that. After everything, the Instagram car, the screenshots, the dead weight message, the missing money, some part of me that still remembered being a small child was watching the door and hoping. She didn't come. What came instead, while I was being prepped and a nurse was labeling my 4-line, was a notification on my phone. Petra had sent a photo. She was in the passenger seat of the new SUV, sunglasses on, coffee cup in hand. The caption read, Hope everything goes okay today. Folded hands. I turned my phone face down on the hospital bed and let the anesthesiologist do her work. I woke up some time later to a recovery room that was quiet and bright and smelled like antiseptic. My mouth was dry. My side ached with the specific heaviness of post-surgical settling. Odessa was in the chair beside me on her phone, and she looked up immediately when she saw my eyes open. "It went well," she said. "You're okay." I nodded. Then I noticed she had an odd expression, careful, like she was managing something. "Your phone has been going," she said. "A lot." Odessa showed me her own phone first rather than handing me mine, which told me she had been watching the situation develop in real time and wanted to manage how I received it while I was still in recovery. The fundraiser had spread, not virally in a chaotic way, but in the specific way things spread when a story has enough visible, public contradictions that people start connecting dots on their own. My mother's Instagram was public. Her car post was still up, time-stamped. The fundraiser, though it named nothing, had been shared by enough mutual connections that people who knew our family had started piecing the timeline together quietly, and then not so quietly. Comments were appearing on my mother's car post now. Not hostile, just pointed. Questions about timing. Observations about priorities. A few people tagging her directly in the fundraiser post without commentary, just the link. The image she had spent years constructing with careful captions and gratitude posts was developing visible cracks in real time. Then my phone, which Odessa finally handed over, showed one call above all the others. My mother. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A live call, made while I was still in surgery, that she had tried 4 times. I called her back from the recovery bed, still groggy, still hooked to a monitor. She answered on the first ring and her first words were, "How dare you embarrass me like this?" I was still in a hospital bed. My side was still heavy from surgery. There was an 4 in my left arm. And my mother was shouting about her reputation. I let her go for a while. She said I had manipulated people online. She said I had made her look like a monster. She said I had betrayed the family by making private matters public, conveniently forgetting that she had been making private matters public in family group chats and at dinner tables for years, just always her version of them. When she finally slowed down, I spoke. I told her that she hadn't just declined to help with money. I told her I could have found a way to survive that, as I had found ways to survive every other time she declined. What I could not survive cleanly was the other part. The lie delivered in real time, the smear campaign to family members, the suggestion that my surgery was exaggerated, the message describing me as dead weight in the same hours I was sitting in a parking lot trying not to panic. I told her she had not just refused to show up financially. She had worked actively to make sure no one else would either. She denied everything, then deflected, then cried, then said I had always been too sensitive for the real world. Then, apparently forgetting what she was saying and to whom, she said, "After everything I sacrificed for your sister." She stopped. But the sentence had already landed. I thought about that slipped sentence for days during early recovery. After everything I sacrificed for your sister. Not for my children. Not for this family. For your sister. I started tracking the pattern backward through years of memories I had always filed individually and never laid side by side. The periods of financial crisis in our household had a rhythm. They aligned, not perfectly, but consistently, with moments when Petra needed something expensive. A semester abroad. A car of her own. An apartment upgrade. A business idea that needed startup money. Each time, somewhere in the surrounding weeks, our mother would contact me with a problem, a bill, an emergency, a shortfall. I would contribute what I could. The crisis would resolve. Life would continue. I had been a recurring source of supplemental income for a household that was spending its resources in a specific direction that I was never shown. The car was not an isolated decision. It was the visible peak of a pattern. The moment the iceberg broke the surface and became impossible to explain away. Petra texted me 3 days into my recovery. She said she needed to talk. She said she knew things were complicated, but she didn't want to do it over messages. I told her I would meet her when I was well enough to sit upright comfortably. We met the following week at a park near my apartment. Petra looked uncomfortable in a way I had rarely seen her look. Not her usual discomfort of being asked to acknowledge something inconvenient, but something deeper. She was quieter than normal. She had brought coffee for both of us, and she held hers with both hands like she needed something to hold. She told me our mother had been describing me to her for years as someone who rejected help, and then complained about not receiving it. Someone who was too proud and too difficult, and who blamed the family for choices I had made independently. She said she had believed it because she had no reason not to, because I wasn't there to offer a different version, and our mother was always there. Then she told me something about the car that shifted things. It wasn't paid for. Not fully. Their mother had financed it aggressively, more than she could realistically manage, and had pulled money from multiple places to cover the down payment and first few months. One of those places, Petra now believed, involved money that had moved through accounts connected to both of them in ways that neither had fully tracked. Petra looked genuinely shaken. Not performing it. Actually shaken. She lied to me too, she said. Just differently. I believed her. I didn't forgive everything in that moment. Years of Petra's silence and comfort had cost me something real. But I believed that she was finally looking at the full picture. Then she said, "There's something else you need to know about Dad's money." Our father had passed away several years earlier. He hadn't been wealthy, but he had been careful, a quality my mother had always described as stingy when he was alive and impractical in retrospect. He had left behind a modest insurance payout and a small amount in savings with the informal, but clearly expressed intention that it be divided between his 2 children for stability or education. My mother had controlled that money. She had managed the accounts and managed the narrative around them, and her consistent message in the years following his death was that the money had been consumed by expenses, funeral costs, outstanding debts, the general cost of grief and restructuring. Petra told me now, having spoken to a family member who had been present during those early conversations, that the numbers our mother described had never quite added up. That money had not simply been absorbed by necessity. It had been redirected into the household budget that funded, over time, the lifestyle choices that had always seemed just slightly beyond what our mother's income could explain. We had both lost something that was meant to protect us. I had simply lost more of it, and more visibly and without knowing. A relative who had heard about the post-surgery confrontation reached out that week and offered something specific. To be present at an upcoming family birthday gathering where our mother was expected, to help make sure certain conversations happened in a room large enough that they couldn't be privately rewritten afterward. I said yes. The birthday dinner was for a cousin on my father's side, a warm, genuine woman named Petra, and I both liked, which meant both of us were expected to attend. My mother arrived looking composed and put together in the specific way she always did when she expected an audience. Good clothes, warm greetings, the practiced ease of someone who has spent decades being considered the heart of every room she enters. She hugged people. She complimented the table. She asked after children and jobs and how things were going. She had not asked how my recovery was going. She sailed past me with a brief, loaded look that said, "Behave." I waited until dinner was underway and the room had settled into that comfortable post-first course ease. Then I asked a question. Conversationally. Directed at the table generally. I said I had been thinking about timing lately, how certain things happen at the same time as other things, and what that reveals about priorities. The table stayed warm. People were still eating. My mother was still smiling. I asked about the fundraiser timeline, about the hospital deposit, about the Instagram post. I asked out loud, in front of people who knew both of us, why a woman who described herself as barely surviving managed to purchase a luxury vehicle in the same week her child was navigating a medical emergency alone. Then I put the folder on the table. The folder contained printed bank records, screenshots, the message about dead weight, the fundraiser receipts showing who had actually paid for my surgery, a printed timeline of transfers I had sent to my mother across the years. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I had done all the crying I had available for this situation, and what remained was something steadier and more useful. My mother moved through every option available to her. She said the documents were taken out of context. She said I was humiliating the family over money. She said she had been under enormous stress, and that I had no idea what it cost to hold a household together. She cried. She turned to Petra once, clearly expecting backup, and Petra looked at the table. A cousin tried to soften it, suggested maybe this could be a private conversation, maybe this wasn't the place. I told him gently that I had tried private. Private had resulted in smear campaigns and stolen emergency savings, and a voicemail demanding to know how dare I while I was still in surgical recovery. My mother said she had always done her best. She said everything she had ever done was for her family. I waited until it was completely quiet. Then I looked at her directly. You didn't lose me because of money, I said. You lost me because you lied. Nobody spoke for a long moment after that. Not even her. The fallout was not dramatic in a cinematic way. It was quieter and more lasting. Family members who had received my mother's version of events for years now had another version, documented, with receipts, delivered in a room full of witnesses. The social architecture she had built, the image of the generous, burdened, big-hearted mother and her ungrateful, difficult child, developed fractures that her Instagram captions couldn't fill. People didn't turn on her publicly, but they pulled back. Invitations became less frequent. The comment sections of her posts got quieter. The cousin she had leaned on most for emotional validation started being unavailable in the specific way people become unavailable when they have decided to stop enabling something. Petra moved out of the family home and into her own apartment. She and I were not close. That would take time and consistent behavior from her that hadn't accumulated yet. But she had stopped performing the role assigned to her, and that was something. The car sat in the driveway of a house that was now carrying the debt load of its purchase alongside everything else my mother had accumulated. The bow was long gone. What remained was the monthly payment, showing up reliably, a small recurring consequence. I was recovering physically, slowly, properly, with rest I finally allowed myself. Then my mother sent a message. Short. No preamble. Can we start over? I met her for coffee 3 weeks later. Not because I had forgiven everything. Not because I was ready to return to what we had been. But because I had spent my entire life having the conversations she controlled, on her terms, in her timing, shaped around her comfort. I wanted one that was mine. I told her I wasn't there to negotiate a relationship. I was there to say something clearly, once, so I would never have to wonder if I had. I told her that forgiveness was not the same as access. That being my mother was a fact of biology, not a credential that suspended accountability. That I had spent years monitoring my own needs carefully, presenting them apologetically, and accepting less because I had been trained to believe that asking for more was a character flaw. I told her I was done with that. I told her that love, real love, showed up. It showed up in hospital parking lots and pre-op waiting rooms, and on the hard side of difficult phone calls. It did not post celebration photos and go silent. It did not describe its own child as dead weight in family group chats. She cried. She said she was sorry. She said she had made mistakes. I told her I believed that she believed that. And I told her that belief was not the same as change. And change was not something I was willing to wait for at the cost of my own healing. I drove home alone. The car was nothing special, older, reliable mine. I sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside. She bought the car she always wanted. I lost the mother I thought I had. And somehow, I'm the one who drove away free. Here is what I need you to take from this story. First, your needs are not a burden. If you have spent years apologizing for having needs, asking carefully, making yourself smaller so other people could remain comfortable, please hear this. Need is human. It is not weakness. It is not manipulation. It is not something that requires an apology. Second, watch patterns, not individual moments. Any single incident can be explained away. It's the pattern that tells the truth. The pattern of who gets helped, when, with what, and at whose expense. Third, you can love someone and still hold them accountable. These are not opposites. Accountability is sometimes the most honest form of love available. Fourth, the people who show up during your hardest moments are your real family, regardless of what biology says. Odessa in that waiting room mattered more than any blood relation who posted champagne toasts while I was in surgery. Fifth, healing requires that you stop protecting the person who hurt you. Every time you soften their story, absorb the blame, or stay quiet to keep the peace, you are spending energy that belongs to your own recovery. Stop spending it there. If this story reached something real inside you, if it named a pain you have been carrying quietly, please hit like right now. Leave a comment telling me which chapter hit hardest. Share this with someone who needs to feel less alone today. And please subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories coming, honest, specific, and built for people who are done pretending things are fine when they aren't. I'll see you in the next one.